Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eruvin. We are up to Perek Dal Mishna Yud. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Tzvitlana, Ranbai ben Eliyahu ben Burcha Yisraelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. We have learned that a traveler or a poor man at home may designate a specific place at another location as his Shabbat residence. We spoke about it in Mishnah 7 and 9 of chapter 4. The following Mishnah discusses whether a person who began a journey but then turned back has the status of a traveler. If one set out from his house on Friday to place an eruv at a particular place for himself and the other people of his city, which the Rav explains, the people of his city appointed him as their agent to place an eruv at a specific location along the road, and he set out to do so, and he did this so that they would be able to travel on Shabbat to a nearby city for which they may make an eruv, which means the two cities were less than 4,000 amot apart, so that an eruv placed halfway between them will enable them to travel to the other city on Shabbat. But before he reached the spot where he intended to place the eruv, his friend convinced him to turn back by telling him, for example, that it was too hot or too cold to be outside. However, he still planned on traveling to the other city on Shabbat. Hu mutar lelech. He is still permitted to go on Shabbat to the other city. Since he started out from his house on Friday, he is considered a traveler who may establish a particular spot at another location as his Shabbat residence. And since he intended on placing an eruv in a particular spot, and he still plans to go to the next town on Shabbat, it is as if he explicitly established that spot as his Shabbat residence, and his tichum is measured from there. V'chol bnei ha'ir asurin. However, all the other people of this city are forbidden to travel to the other city, since they remained at home and have bread with which to make an eruv. They are not eligible to designate a spot at another location as their Shabbat residence without placing an eruv there. And since the actual eruv was never set up, they may not walk beyond the tchum of their own city. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir Omer, but Rabbi Meir says, Kol shu yachol ha'arev velo erav harei ze chamar gamal. Anyone who returned to his house and is able to make an eruv with food, but instead designated a particular spot on the road as his Shabbat residence and failed to set up an eruv is like a person driving a donkey and a camel who cannot walk in front of the donkey or behind the camel, but only between the two animals. And the Rav, in his commentary to chapter 4, Mishnah 3, explains a donkey is driven from behind while a camel is led from the front. Therefore, a person who guides both at the same time must walk between them. And the analogy is that in our case, the owner may walk only between the intended eruv location and his city. He may not go beyond the intended eruv location because that spot might not be his Shabbat residence, and he may not go beyond his house in the opposite direction because the intended eruv location might have become his Shabbat residence. Therefore, he is confined to the area between the two. And the commentaries explain, Rabbi Meir is not sure whether a person who left his house and then returned is considered a traveler who may designate a spot at another location as a Shabbat residence or not. If he is considered a traveler, the intended eruv location is considered his Shabbat residence. But if he is not considered a traveler, his own city is his Shabbat residence. Since it's a matter of doubt whether the intended eruv location became his Shabbat residence, he must accept both possibilities. He must accept that the location did become his Shabbat residence, which means that his tichum is measured from there. But at the same time, he must accept the possibility that it did not become his Shabbat residence, in which case his tichum is measured from his city. Therefore, he may walk only in the tichum that is common to both areas. And the Rab says, V'alachak Rabbi Yehuda, the halakha does follow Rabbi Yehuda. And that is in Rabotai Mishnah Yud. Mishnah Yud Aleph continues. We learned in the first Mishnah of this chapter that one who traveled beyond his tchum on Shabbat is confined to his immediate 4 Amah area. The first part of Mishnah Yud Aleph discusses the law for a person who traveled just beyond his tchum. Mi sheyatzah chutz hatechum afilu amah achad lo yikanes. One who went out of the tchum, even if he went only 1 amah past the boundary, may not re-enter the part of the tchum that is beyond his immediate 4 amot. Now, although the 4 amot to which he is now entitled enables him to return to his original tchum within the 3 amah overlapping area, he does not regain its use. Now, the commentators explain, we do not say that since he can legally re-enter the first 3 amot of his tchum, we consider it as if he never left and he may resume the use of his tchum. Rather, once he illegally leaves his tchum, he loses it and may enter only as far as his 4 amah tchum allows. However, like we learned in Mishnah 3, if he left his tchum legally, for example, to save a life, and is granted a new tchum of 2,000 amot, the rabbis were lenient and allowed him to resume his original tchum if his new tchum overlaps it and enables him to re-enter. We spoke about this more in Mishnah 3. The Mishnah continues, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, but Rabbi Eliezer says, as long as he still has access to his original tchum, we consider it as if he never traveled beyond it. Shtayim ikanes, therefore, if he is within 2 amot of the tchum, he may re-enter it. Shalosh lo ikanes, but if he went 3 amot out of the tchum, he may not re-enter it since he no longer has access to it. And the commentators explain, what does it mean if he went 3 amot out of the tchum? He is standing in the 3rd amah outside the tchum. He may not re-enter it. And the Rav explains in Rabbi Eliezer's view recorded in Mishnah 5, one who is beyond his tchum has only 2 amot in each direction. Therefore, if he is within 2 amot of his tchum, he has access to the very end of his tchum boundary. But if he is 2 amot or more outside of his tchum, he no longer has access to his original tchum, and since he cannot legally enter his tchum, he must remain in his 4 amot until the end of Shabbat. And the Rav says, Ven halachak Rabbi Eliezer, the halakha does not follow. Rabbi Eliezer follows the Tana Kama, that one who went out of the tchum, even if he only went 1 amah past the boundary, he may not re-enter. The Mishnah now discusses the law for a traveler who finds himself just outside the tchum of the city at the beginning of Shabbat. A traveler who was overtaken by darkness, meaning Shabbat began, when he was still outside the tchum of the city to which he was headed, even if he is only 1 amah outside of it, does not acquire the tchum of the city. Rather, his tchum is measured from his location at the beginning of Shabbat. Lo ikanes, therefore he may not enter the city which is more than 2,000 amot from his location. However, had he been within the tchum of the city when Shabbat began, he acquires the city's tchum and may walk throughout the city in 2,000 amot beyond it in every direction, like we learned in Mishnah 4. The reason here he's not allowed to is because he was still outside the tchum of the city to which he was headed before Shabbat began. Rabbi Shimon Omer, but Rabbi Shimon says, Afilu 15 amot ikanes, even if he was 15 amot out away from the marker that defines the boundary of the city's tchum when Shabbat began, he may enter the city. She'en hamashochot mematzin et amidot mipnei hato'in, because the surveyors who measure a city's tchum are not precise with regard to the tchum measurement and place the tchum marker 15 amot closer to the city than the actual tchum boundary on account of those who err, which the Rab explains as a safeguard against those who might wander past the tchum marker without realizing it until it is too late. The surveyors would not put the marker at the precise limit, but would place it nearer to the city. Therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, a traveler who finds himself 15 amot short of the tchum marker is actually within the tchum of the city. And since he is within the tchum of the city, he acquires the city's tchum and he may enter the city. However, the Rab explains in the first case of the Mishnah, where one left the city's tchum and is just a few amot past the marker, Rabbi Shimon agrees that he may not return to the city. He is lenient only for a traveler who did not make it to the city before Shabbat began, but not for one who was in the city and should have been careful not to walk past the tchum marker. And the Rab tells us, Ven halachak Rabbi Shimon, the halakha does not follow Rabbi Shimon. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen v'amen.